ADHD entrepreneurs and their brains. Are you able to gain clarity, gain control, and succeed on your terms? Well, bullshit, you say? I got John Warkentin here, multi-generational grain farmer from Saskatchewan, Canada. He's also a commercial property appraiser with Warkentin Appraisal and a real estate development as Warkentin Developments. John, welcome back.
Thanks, Andre.
You've been on a few times, and we always have great conversations. And the one thing I want to share with the listeners is, before your diagnosis, what was your work style and work life prior to your diagnosis of ADHD?
I think you and I have had this discussion before, but I think the biggest thing is I used urgency as my go-to to try and keep the high achieving piece in place. So basically, most people would consider me a workaholic. I like to put a lot of time in, but I used tight deadlines and overloading my workload to try and keep that productivity up. And I think understanding that piece that you brought forward, or what that you helped me with, really changed how I look at it. So I know you had the doctor on that came up with the whole idea of importance versus interest-based nervous system.
Correct. Yeah. William Dodsley, or not Dodsley, Dr. William Dodson. Yeah.
Right. So when you brought that to my attention, or you explained that to me, it really had me go back and have a look at how I was activating my nervous system. So, the four big ones were, I might have this wrong, but new, novel, challenging, interesting, urgent,
and passion.
So when I started thinking about this, it made total sense to how I was operating, or have operated for a long time. Anything that falls kind of in the first four, so new, challenging, interesting, urgent, instantly grab my attention. I have no problem with focus. I'm super productive. Everything works the way I like it to work. When you and I got talking about it, though, urgent can be two pieces. The first urgent is if something goes on and has, like let's say a breakdown at the farm, we got to jump on it and get something fixed in a hurry. That kind of urgent is excellent for my brain. I'm able to focus.
It's fun urgent.
Yeah, it creates energy. It helped the focus snaps right in, creates energy, and away we go. The other urgent that after I got thinking about it, which I have been using, which I think is more energy draining. We all have things in our lives that are important, things we have to get done that aren't any of those other categories. And so what I think in hindsight, what I've been doing is putting things off or procrastinating to the point where they were urgent, and then using urgency to snap back into gear and get them done.
Right. I can relate to that very easily.
So that is largely how I've run a lot of my appraisal business. I give myself deadlines. I don't get stuff done in advance. We push it to the end. We get locked in. And when you have ADHD, when you get focused, I guess that's a state that I really enjoy. I want to be in. But in the past, I've used this procrastination or delay.
Subconsciously, you're referring to, right?
Yeah, not intentionally, of course, but or the other thing I did was I piled work on to the point where my deadlines were so tight that I used the urgency, that kind of forced urgency to create that focus that I needed, which made me really productive.
Well, and for me, I was keeping that urgency almost every morning type early meetings, so that when I got up, I had no choice but to get up and be urgent and spark up to keep going. So I can relate to that very easily.
Yeah, I think honestly, I ran most of my professional life that way.
I think most of us did.
Yeah, and so
Yeah.
I think that when you talk about what's changed the most, so I mean, pre-diagnosis, taking your tactical course, our, 3 or 4 years of discussions, however long we've been talking about this stuff. That's how I ran it. I get up in the morning. I always had a to-do list that was longer than I could even hope to accomplish in a day. It's here, still hasn't gone away.
Still works.
Yeah, but I used this kind of dark side of urgency. I'd like to hear the doctor's thoughts on it, but the forced urgency to really make myself productive. And it worked well, and it wasn't unhealthy.
Wasn't a maladaptive process.
No, but it did get to the point in my life where it was, like every, call it addiction, it was to the point at some points where it was unhealthy, where I pushed myself to work past the point of reasonableness. I'd fixed most of that prior to diagnosis, but I guess the last 6 months, what I've really been looking at is what on the to-do list do I have to use that delayed urgency to activate my brain to do. So now I look at the work and the stuff I do, I try to categorize it into two things. One is what I would call the healthy interest. So new, novel, challenging, missing one.
Urgent and
urgent, just challenging. Anyway, the 4 or 5, what falls into that category where it's like positive energy. Instantly I grab on, I focus, it brings energy to my day. And what am I using kind of procrastination urgency, if you want to call it that, to engage myself to get stuff done. And it's not that it can change overnight, but what I'm trying to do
is
is
to change a habit too.
Exactly.
Right.
And I'm trying to move more of my work day to that first category,
So a lot of what you're talking about is you're changing your habits to not fall into the negative energy or negative draining energy urgency, right? And that's when we're not talking about an ADHD thing here. You're just talking about changing your habits or your routines around that.
Right. And I think the biggest thing with ADHD is that for me to get focused, I think it's spot on. It has to be in that spoke or in that spectrum. But I think the other interesting thing is when I thought about it, the neurotypical people, they talk about this ideal state of flow, which to me, it's like our hyperfocus when we're in the interest state. You know what I mean? It's like, I actually don't necessarily think that this isn't an optimal way of living. I think actually in big picture, some of the neurotypical people could learn something from moving away from importance and into the interest side.
Well, I completely agree. If everyone just works in their unique ability, everyone would be a lot happier. If they would put priority on that as important versus a lot of other people's importance that's not important to them. But I agree. There's a flow. The flow for neurotypicals and the hyper focus in ADHD, I think it's just two massively different speeds for one. But neurotypicals and flow, they can hear things. They're still aware of their surroundings. While ADHD brain and hyperfocus, that's it. That's the only thing, right? Has its good and bads. So now hearing you talk now, John, is where the ADHD nervous system, I think, like you said, it's more about us getting into hyperfocus because we can get stuff done. As long as it's interesting, challenging, competitive, urgent, novel, and within a passion, we can get into the hyper focus quicker. Now, we can also get into hyper focus with shit we don't like to do. I know I do that. I pile a lot of stuff I don't want to do or don't enjoy doing all in one pile so I can just get it done, have the pain over as quickly as possible. But I can get into hyper focus mode and just drill through that. Frustration increases, or like your term, energy draining. So I think that's the key thing. The ADHD nervous system is all about getting to hyper focus as quickly as possible. And we have a shortcut with urgency, novelty, challenge, communicate. No, I'm starting to flounder on those. Passion, Novel, interesting, competitive, urgent, and passionate. NECUP. That's what I got to remember. But we can do hyper focus work in energy driving stuff or energy draining stuff. And I think what I'm hearing from you, a lot of your stuff is you're hyper focusing on the energy draining stuff. And it doesn't matter neurotypical or not, or ADHD brain or not. If you're doing a lot of stuff you don't enjoy, you cannot enjoy yourself.
I think though, I mean, when I thought back to how we got there, because the world is largely made up of neurotypical people who are importance based, it doesn't matter what organization a person's in, whether it's your job or your family or a school system or a church organization or a social club or even your group of friends. I mean, they all typically organize around this importance thing. And I think for a long time, and it kind of gets into the next piece that I think has been a big change for me, but humans by nature want to fit in or be part of the group and be accepted. And, I think when I look at the using urgency to get into hyper focus and to try and get things done that are quote unquote important, I think it was us trying to adapt to an importance-based culture.
It's the only way to be accepted, right? If you follow the important nervous system concept.
Yeah, and I think honestly, I mean, people talk about self-awareness and self-acceptance, and I think a lot of ADHD people are very self-aware because, to be totally honest, for most of our lives, people have been pointing out the things that are irritating about us, or that bother us or bother them about us.
Yeah, it's not standard.
No, yeah, I mean, so when people do that, we become very aware of how we're perceived by other people. And so I think personally, I've used this way to get myself into focus to try and get the quote unquote important work done, which has made me successful. We have been successful in our 3 businesses. And I think that is kind of like positive reinforcement. It's like, okay, we do this, it works, we're going to do more of it, it still works. But it gets you into that cycle of, like you said, habits of trying to create that ongoing day-to-day that is a successful work life. But it does come with energy draining, which, when you get home from work and you're absolutely drained because you've sucked it all out of you by how you've operated that day at work, it doesn't leave you that same energy for family time or social life.
Yeah, and then you're not fun to be around when you're in that negative draining, energy draining, hyper focus.
Right. So, for me, in the perfect world, if you can get into hyper focus on stuff you're interested in, or I can, and it energizes us over the day and we go home happy, it's not only a win for our productivity and for our self-confidence because we've been productive all day, but it also makes the home life better, or our personal lives better. And I think that is the other thing that being really aware of how that brain works has really, I guess, helped my non-work life, both with my kids and my wife, but also with our friends and how much energy I've got to do other things that aren't related to the office.
You said that a few times. What are you referring to?
Sorry, as far as which?
You're seeing things different. You keep saying now that you understand the brain, you're seeing things differently.
Yeah, well, so tactical, which I went through your tactical course about a year ago, was
I
quite.
see.
I guess I don't know if it's okay to bring that in, but tactical was super helpful because if I'm going to cram it down into a nice tight little package, that program, you help to see I guess, what the challenges are with ADHD, executive function, time blindness, short-term working memory, like the whole
And
list.
brain inhibition. Yep.
Right. But the way you proposed it is like every one of the challenges has an offsetting positive.
Always. Strengths can be weaknesses and weaknesses can be strengths.
Right. So that context versus looking at those things as negative, but looking at them both as negatives and positives, was where the
And
program.
managing them. And we were talking about managing.
Yeah, and looking at systems or processes, or I call them hacks. I know you don't like the word hack, but ways to I guess work into the positive aspects of it.
Yeah. Yep.
And I think the other really helpful thing was, you talked about the why. So with the neurodivergent brain, there are things that are going to be a challenge, will always be a challenge. So rather than, me being the kind of guy who always wants to fix it, make it better, I had to come to terms with the idea that my short-term working memory and my time blindness, I can create systems to try and make them function better. I'm never going to fix that. That's something that is just the way it is.
Well, and I really like how you said that, because you can't fix it. And it's no different than anyone else in the world, neurotypical wise or neurodivergent. Everyone has their own strengths and own weaknesses they cannot fix. So working around and scaffolding those weaknesses or getting rid of them is key. So it's not just our brains that requires this, it's everyone. And then you're making a decision. I can't fix it, so I'm going to figure a way out to make it work. It's key.
But I think it might be subtle, but that was one of the big shifts for me. So as a guy who likes to fix things, make them better, move on, I tried for 50 years to try and fix it, make it better, and I couldn't, right? So the acceptance piece, I think, is, so through, Andre and I met through Strategic Coach. Obviously, many of the Strategic Coach people have been on the podcast. But the whole unique ability thing has a lot to do with self-awareness. What are our strengths? What are our weaknesses? Be honest with them. But for me, this really took it to that next level of self-acceptance. So understanding how we're perceived by society, understanding what our strengths are, what our weaknesses are, that's one whole piece. But moving that to self-acceptance, I mean, that was kind of the holy grail of the program, because once you accept yourself, it's at the time I was taking your program, I also read, and you and I have had this discussion, but I read Brene Brown's book, Atlas of the Heart. And, it was odd that, of course, I read it, the chapters relevant to this just at the time we were going through it tactical, but insecurity, I hope I have this right, but insecurity is the opposite of self-acceptance. So, when you have a program or you present the program in such a way that you can move people like me closer to self-acceptance, again, you're moving away from insecurity, and that opens a person up to being vulnerable and being able to talk about some of the challenges that, we've had in our lives. And I think that was the other thing with Tactical. The three of us in there came from very different backgrounds. But very quickly we got to the point where we were having discussions about some of the challenges. And oddly, they were extremely lined up. So problems or challenges I had in the past were very similar to both of the other people, even though we come from different parts of North America, very different industries, very different family structures. But that was really interesting to me, and really, I think, helped with the self-acceptance piece, because, I always thought in the past, I guess going back, I've known for a long time that my brain worked differently than most people. But I really didn't know why. And I really didn't know that there were other people out there that had similar challenges to what I have. And I think that was the piece where you put us in a group. We worked through some of the the pieces as to why things are the way they are, we had those shared conversations, and it really helped to the point where it's like, okay, yeah, things maybe are a little bit different for us than they are for other people, but that's okay. And I think that was the heart of Tactical. I mean, that's why it was successful for, you know, our group that went through it with you.
You mean, oh, the ADHD Transformation Journey Program?
Yeah.
Yeah. So how's that changed what you do today? Because the first question I'd ask you is, what was your work style and work life prior to diagnosis? So how is it now?
Yeah, I think the self-acceptance piece is the biggest, because it also, the other thing it did was it gave us the language to talk about it. So when it comes to some of my challenges, I mean, honestly, my short-term working memory is brutal. But when you accept the fact that it is what it is, then you've, I guess for me, then I can go to a client or my secretary or my family and say, hey, you know, this is a challenge for me. Can you send me that again? Or can you send me a reminder? Or can you help remind me to put that in my phone so that I don't forget things? But just the fact that you acknowledge it and are willing to talk about it with people fixed a lot of problems for me. And if the other thing I found was, when I was open about it, I didn't get really a lot of negative reactions. When you tell people, listen, hey,
interesting. Tell us more.
yeah,
Because I think most people are afraid of that.
well, and I mean, when I look back over, you know, 40 or 50 years, I spent a lot of time and energy either trying to fix things that I messed up or, you know, cover up shortcomings that I've had. And when I'm like, no, this is how it is, I need to accept this, and we're going to go forward. And when you tell your, you know, a business partner or a staff member or your family, and you say, hey, you know what, I don't have a pen with me, I'm driving, can you text or email me that, or I will forget, and it's not that I don't care.
Right.
And this is why. Yeah, I really didn't get any negative feedback. And I mean, it was something, I don't know, not really a shame, but it's something that I think we hid for a long time because we wanted it to be different, or we thought we could work through it, or we could, you know.
Well, we were told we were failures because we couldn't remember stuff, or we couldn't keep track of things, or we
Yeah,
didn't show up on time.
yeah, and I think, I mean, it changed some conversations, but I really didn't get a lot of negative feedback from just accepting it and telling people. But it really changes. So the piece that really, I think, for a lot of people that is a little bit different is, you know, for a neurotypical person that's life is based on importance, if you forget something, forget appointment, forget whatever it happens to be, they think it's not important to you or you don't care. That's
They make the assumption in the
yeah. So
perceived that way.
they're filtering your actions through the way they see the world. So when you forget something and somebody thinks you don't care, that's a very different conversation than if they're upset at you because you forgot to put a reminder in your phone.
Mhm.
So this whole idea that, you know, the forgetting or the time blindness has to do with caring and importance. And what, you know, for us, that's those are separate things. Whether we
Mhm.
care about something or whether we can execute on memory or time are independent. At least that's how I look at them for me. That doesn't mean I shouldn't show up on time. It doesn't mean that I shouldn't put reminders in my phone. But once people that are part of my life understand that it isn't necessarily a lack of caring or a lack of commitment to importance, it really changed the conversation on a lot of those things. And, you know, I think
it's a valid. Yeah, finish your thought.
those things caused a lot of hurt for people I care about in the past. And being able to have the conversations and putting the wording around it based on what I've learned has really helped with those relationships.
Well, and it's the hurt that was caused also their perception, not necessarily your intention at the same time.
Yeah, I think that's such an interesting thing. I mean, I think one of the real shortcomings on human communication is that we all run someone else's actions through our own filter, how
Yeah.
we see the world.
Mhm.
And I'm no less guilty of that than other people. When I see somebody do something, I'm like, geez, if I did that, it would mean this. But in truth, different people think about things totally differently. And I think helping them understand our why or how come things happen the way they are. They may not believe us, but most people that are part of our world do. And it
Or at
really,
least they'll try and understand, not necessarily believe us.
yeah, I
Different
mean,
things.
I not that I've never got the comment that that's an excuse. Well,
Well,
excuse,
you never explained it as an excuse. You just explained that's the explanation and the why. And those are two different things.
but I think for a lot of people, I think that is very helpful when you have the language around it and you have an understanding about how your own brain works, and you can communicate that to other
Mhm.
people. It does really improve the relationships.
Yeah, and what I was going to say earlier is Dr. Russell Barkley. What he said is ADHD is not it's not a condition. It's this is his words. I don't completely read how he said it, but the meaning, the lesson that I think is important. ADHD is not a disorder of not knowing what to do. It's the disorder of doing it. So we know it's important for others. We know it's important, but for the brain to activate to get that done, that's the actual difference, right? People, if it's important space nervous system, people can go, but the ADHD brain needs that one of those extra fives: novel, interesting, challenging, urgent, or passion.
The other one that we really get misconceived with a lot, or I find, is if something's important and we have to use urgency, so delaying, procrastinating, whatever you want to call it, to the point where it's urgent to get it done, that also appears to neurotypical people as not caring. If we have to
Again, from their
procrastinate,
perception, and that's the social norm.
right? So when they perceive it as not caring and procrastination, where we're using, I guess, the delay and the activation or the focus that comes from urgency to try and get it done. And that's what I find. If something's not interesting to me, but it's important, I always default to the urgency. I
Yeah,
mean,
then the draining one.
right, exactly. So,
Yeah.
but it is often perceived that I'm not prioritizing whatever it is that has to get done. We don't
Yeah.
care.
Or doing it in a fun, jovial fashion.
Right. And I can tell you that, when I get into focus or hyper focus, especially on that, that to-do list that has to get done that I maybe don't want to be doing, I'm probably not the friendliest, most jovial person to be around when I
Well,
put my head
no
down
one
again.
is.
But you know what I mean? It's like, so I think that is the other one that really comes across in a way that is more difficult for neurotypical people to understand.
Nice. Yeah, and I think that's a great things for the listeners to reflect on. Clarity of self helps you gain self-acceptance after you gain self-awareness. And like you said, and that leads away from insecurity. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Self-awareness into self-acceptance leads away from insecurity. And just remember, listeners, your struggles are not your own. There are others that have the same struggles, the same types, maybe not specific, but the same type. There's a lot of us out there. And I think John brings up a really great point that the urgency mode of the ADHD interest-based nervous system, you got two sides: energy generating, using energy or getting urgent tasks that's energy driving. For me, it's problem solving, last minute construction site problems, or helping people figure out some of their own challenges. And then the energy draining stuff, which is doing shit you don't like, and you don't find as urgent, or you have to use urgency to get into hyperfocus to get it done. So, man, thanks, John, for this conversation. I'm really glad we got more of the thinking about the self-awareness into self-acceptance. And I'm really like how you've been thinking about the urgency thing over the last 2 years has been really cool. And I'm glad we got to figure it more out today.
Perfect.
All right, thanks again, John. And to you, the listeners, does any of this have any relation to you, or do you feel this makes sense to you? Please let me know. It'd be great to hear from you. And thanks again, John.
Thank you.
And to you, the listeners, thanks again for learning with me.